The crimson sunset painted the Kansas sky as Rosalie Kendrick stumbled through the doorway of Dr. Miller's office, one hand clutching her side, the other bracing against the doorframe to keep from collapsing. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the October chill, and her normally vibrant eyes were dulled with pain. Selena, Kansas in 1876 was a growing town, a crossroads where cattle drives met the Kansas Pacific Railway, but it still wasn't big enough for Rosalie to hide her troubles from curious eyes. She'd arrived 3 months ago, fleeing a past she never spoke of, taking work as a seamstress at Mrs. Holloway's dress shop. She'd kept to herself, saved every penny, and now all those savings were gone, spent on the stagecoach that had been attacked by bandits 2 days prior. "Miss Kendrick, doctor," Miller said, looking up from his ledger. His spectacles slid down his nose as he assessed her pale complexion. "What brings you here this evening?" "I fear something's not right," Rosalie whispered, her voice strained. "The pain. It started yesterday. I thought it would pass, but it's only gotten worse." Dr. Miller helped her to the examination table, his brows furrowing as she winced with each movement. After a thorough examination, his expression grew grave. "It's your appendix, Miss Kendrick. It needs to come out immediately." "I'll need to operate tonight." The color drained from Rosalie's face. "How much will it cost?" $20 for the surgery, another $5 for the medicine and care afterward, $25. It might as well have been $1,000. "I don't have it," she admitted, shame burning through her chest. "The stagecoach was robbed. Everything I had was in that bag." Dr. Miller's face softened with sympathy, but his words remained firm. "I'm sorry, Miss Kendrick, but I can't perform the surgery without payment." "Perhaps someone in town would. I'll pay it." The deep voice from the doorway startled them both. Rosalie turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the dying light. As he stepped into the office, her gaze traveled from scuffed boots to broad shoulders, taking in the dusty trail clothes that marked him as a cowboy fresh off the range. His face was partially obscured by several days' worth of beard, but his eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, were clear and direct. "Xavier O'Malley," he said, removing his hat and nodding to them both. "Just rode in with the double-cross herd from Texas. I can cover the lady's expenses." Rosalie tried to protest, but another wave of pain silenced her. The cowboy Xavier was already reaching into his pocket, counting out the money from a leather pouch. "That's very generous, Mr. O'Malley," Dr. Miller said, accepting the payment. "But may I ask why you're helping a stranger?" Xavier's gaze briefly met Rosalie's before returning to the doctor. "My mother died of a burst appendix when I was 8. No one should suffer that fate if it can be prevented." His voice carried no invitation for further questions. "Doctor." Miller nodded, pocketing the money and immediately setting to work preparing for surgery. "I'll need to give her chloroform. The operation will take about an hour." "I'll wait," Xavier said, settling into a chair by the door. Rosalie's last conscious thought before the sweet-smelling cloth covered her face was wondering why a trail-worn cowboy would spend a month's wages on a woman he'd never met. When Rosalie awoke, the first gray light of dawn was filtering through the window. Her mouth felt dry as cotton and a dull ache throbbed in her side. As her vision cleared, she realized she wasn't alone. The cowboy Xavier was sitting in a chair beside her bed, his long legs stretched out before him, hat resting on his knee. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice rough. He straightened, alert despite the shadows of exhaustion beneath his eyes. "Said I would." He reached for a cup of water on the nearby table and helped her drink. "Doc says you'll be just fine now. Appendix came out clean." Rosalie sank back against the pillow. "Why would you help me?" "You don't even know me." A half-smile crossed his face. "Seemed the right thing to do." He paused. "Besides, you looked like you could use a friend." $25 is a lot to spend on friendship," she said. "Money comes and goes," Xavier replied with a shrug. "Life's harder to replace." Dr. Miller entered then, checking Rosalie's bandages and pronouncing her on the road to recovery. "You'll need to rest here for a few days. Then light duties only for at least 3 weeks." Rosalie's heart sank. 3 weeks without work meant 3 weeks without pay. She'd already lost her room at the boarding house she'd been behind on rent before the stagecoach robbery, and now she'd have no means to secure new accommodations. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier spoke up. "Doc, is there anyone who could look after her once she leaves here?" She mentioned losing her lodgings. Dr. Miller stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Mrs. Holloway might take her in, seeing as she works at the dress shop, but Mrs. Holloway's got her hands full with those grandchildren visiting." "I don't want to be a burden," Rosalie protested weakly. "You won't be," Xavier said firmly. "I'll speak with Mrs. Holloway. In the meantime, you focus on getting stronger." Before she could argue further, he donned his hat and strode out into the morning light, leaving Rosalie wondering what kind of man would go to such lengths for a stranger. Over the next 2 days, Rosalie drifted in and out of sleep, her body slowly healing from the surgery. Xavier visited each day, bringing small comforts, fresh fruit from the general store, a book of poetry he'd found at the barber shop, wildflowers he'd gathered on the outskirts of town. They talked during his visits, careful conversations that skirted around personal details, yet somehow revealed the shape of who they were. She learned he was 31, had been riding the cattle trails for 12 years, and had a reputation as one of the best horsemen in the outfit. He was between jobs now, having just delivered the double-cross herd to the stockyards. Xavier, in turn, discovered she was 26, had come west from Pennsylvania after the death of her parents, and had a gift for creating beautiful garments from the simplest materials. What neither of them mentioned were the shadows that occasionally darkened their expressions, the ghosts of memories better left undisturbed. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Holloway herself appeared, a formidable woman with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense manner that belied her generous heart. "That cowboy of yours is quite persuasive," she announced, settling into the chair beside Rosalie's bed. "He's paid your room and board for a month and your wages too, said you're to rest and not worry about a thing until you're fully recovered." "He's not my cowboy," Rosalie protested, heat rising to her cheeks. "And I can't accept such charity," Mrs. Holloway snorted. "Pride's a luxury for those who can afford it, girl. Besides, he says it's not charity, it's an investment. Seems to think your sewing skills are worth preserving." Her expression softened. "He's also arranged for my nephew to fetch your things from the boarding house and bring them to my place. You'll stay in the room above the shop once the doctor releases you." Rosalie was speechless. The kindness overwhelmed her, especially coming from a man who owed her nothing. When Xavier visited that evening, she confronted him. "You had no right to arrange my life," she said, though there was more bewilderment than anger in her tone. "Probably not," he agreed easily, settling into the now familiar chair. "But you needed help, and I was in a position to give it." "I can't repay you," she said, twisting the blanket between her fingers. "I'm not asking you to." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Look, I've spent years moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. Maybe I'm tired of that life. Maybe helping you is a way of helping myself remember there's more to living than just surviving." His honesty disarmed her. "What will you do now?" "Will you join another cattle drive?" Xavier hesitated, then shook his head. "Not right away. I've been thinking of staying in Selena for a while. Town's growing and I've got some money saved. Might be time to try something new." The possibility that he might remain in town sent an unexpected flutter through Rosalie's chest. "What would you do?" "I've always had a way with horses. Thought I might see if the livery needs another hand, or maybe look into starting a small breeding operation outside town." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "For now, though, my only plan is to make sure you're back on your feet." When Dr. Miller finally declared Rosalie well enough to leave his care 5 days after the surgery, it was Xavier who escorted her to Mrs. Holloway's shop. The room above the dress shop was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a chair beside the window that overlooked Main Street. "It's perfect," Rosalie said, genuinely pleased with the cozy space. "Mrs. Holloway says you can start light work whenever you feel able, just mending and simple alterations at first. Xavier lingered in the doorway, suddenly awkward. I'll be at the Drover's Hotel if you need anything. Rosalie nodded, uncertain how to express her gratitude without sounding overly emotional. Thank you, Mr. O'Malley, for everything. Xavier, he corrected with a smile. After spending the night in a doctor's office together, I think we can dispense with formalities. The following weeks established a new rhythm to Rosalie's life. She gradually resumed her work at the dress shop, starting with simple repairs before moving on to more complex tailoring. True to his word, Xavier had secured a position at Jensen's Livery, where his experience with horses quickly made him indispensable. Their paths crossed frequently in the small town. Xavier would tip his hat when they passed on the street, sometimes stopping to inquire about her health or share a bit of local news. Occasionally, he would appear at the dress shop near closing time, offering to walk her back to Mrs. Holloway's. These walks became the highlight of Rosalie's days, quiet conversations about everything and nothing, punctuated by comfortable silences. As November settled over Selena, bringing chill winds and the promise of winter, Rosalie found herself thinking more and more about the mysterious cowboy who had saved her life. Despite their growing friendship, she sensed he was holding part of himself back, just as she guarded her own secrets. One evening, as they walked along the quiet streets, snow beginning to dust their shoulders, Xavier surprised her with an invitation. The town's holding a harvest dance on Saturday, he said, his voice casual though his eyes were watchful. Thought you might like to go. Rosalie hesitated. She hadn't attended any social functions since arriving in Selena, preferring to keep to herself. I don't have anything suitable to wear, she said finally, a transparent excuse. Xavier chuckled. You work in a dress shop and you're the finest seamstress in town. Somehow I doubt that's really the problem. She smiled despite herself. You're right, of course. The truth is I'm not much for crowds these days. We could just go for a little while, he suggested. First sign you're uncomfortable, we'll leave. Looking up at him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, Rosalie found herself nodding. All right, but don't say I didn't warn you about my dancing. The harvest dance was held in the newly constructed town hall, a building that still smelled of fresh-cut lumber. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the gathered townsfolk. A small band played in the corner, fiddle, guitar, and harmonica, creating lively tunes that had couples spinning across the polished floor. Rosalie had worked late into the night creating a new dress for the occasion, a simple but elegant gown of deep green wool with subtle embroidery at the collar and cuffs. When Xavier arrived to escort her, the appreciation in his eyes sent a warm flush through her body. You look beautiful, he said simply, offering his arm. At the dance, Rosalie was surprised by how many people greeted her warmly. In her determination to remain unnoticed, she hadn't realized how many connections she'd formed in her months in Selena. Mrs. Holloway introduced her to seemingly endless relatives. Dr. Miller and his wife insisted she join them for Sunday dinner sometime, and even the mayor's wife complimented her on a dress Rosalie had altered for her the previous week. Through it all, Xavier remained at her side, his steady presence a comfort in the swirl of social interactions. When the band struck up a waltz, he turned to her with a raised eyebrow. Shall we test those dancing skills you've been warning me about? To Rosalie's surprise, Xavier was an excellent dancer, guiding her smoothly across the floor with a confident hand at the small of her back. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, as if they'd danced together 100 times before. Where does a cowboy learn to waltz? She asked, breathless not from exertion but from the intensity of his gaze. A shadow crossed his face. My father insisted all his sons learn proper social graces, said it was the mark of a gentleman. It was the first time he'd mentioned his father. You have brothers. Had, he corrected quietly. 2, both gone now. Before she could ask more, the music ended and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them, a door cracked open, inviting further confidence. Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, snowflakes drifting lazily around them, Rosalie found the courage to broach the subject again. "You never talk about your family," she said softly, "other than mentioning your mother's passing." Xavier was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed, his breath forming a cloud in the cold air. "My father was Daniel O'Malley, a rancher in the Texas Hill Country. Had a spread of about 10,000 acres, the Triple O it was called." His voice took on a distant quality. "He built it from nothing, married my mother when she was barely 18, and they had 3 boys in quick succession. You were the youngest," he nodded, "by 2 years. Edward was the eldest, then Thomas, then me. We were raised to work hard, respect the land, and uphold the family name." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Father had grand plans for all of us. Edward would inherit the ranch, Thomas would manage the business side of things, and I was destined for politics. None of us wanted what he wanted, but we were too young to defy him." They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps crunching on the newly fallen snow. After Mother died, things changed. Father became harder, more demanding. "When I was 16, the war between the states broke out. Edward and Thomas both enlisted with the Confederacy against Father's wishes. Edward died at Shiloh. Thomas came home missing an arm and died of fever 3 months later. "I'm so sorry," Rosalie whispered, instinctively placing her hand on his arm. "Father never recovered from losing them. Blamed me for not going too, though I was too young to enlist when they did. After the war, when everything we'd known was gone, he tried to rebuild, but his heart wasn't in it anymore." Xavier's voice grew rough. "One night, after drinking heavily, he accused me of being a coward, of dishonoring my brother's sacrifice. We fought. I left that night and never went back." "Did you ever learn what happened to him?" "To the ranch," Xavier nodded. "He died 3 years later. The ranch was sold to pay debts. Nothing left of the Triple O now except memories." They had reached Mrs. Holloway's shop. Xavier stopped at the door, his expression hidden in the shadows. "That's why you live the way you do," Rosalie said, understanding dawning, "moving from place to place, never settling." "Seemed easier that way," he admitted. "No attachments, no expectations, no disappointments." "And now?" she asked, scarcely breathing. He reached out, gently brushing a snowflake from her cheek. "Now I'm not so sure anymore." The moment hung between them, fragile as crystal. Then Xavier stepped back, tipping his hat. "Good night, Rosalie. Thank you for accompanying me this evening." "Thank you for asking me," she replied softly, watching as he turned and walked away into the snowy night. The week following the harvest dance brought the first real winter storm of the season. Snow piled high against buildings, and bitter winds howled down the streets of Selena. Business at the dress shop slowed to a trickle, giving Rosalie time to work on a special project, a warm woolen shirt for Xavier, her way of thanking him for his kindness. She hadn't seen much of him since the dance. He'd been busy at the livery, especially with the arrival of a string of horses from a nearby ranch that needed breaking. When they did cross paths, there was a new awareness between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the confidences they'd shared. As Rosalie stitched the final button on the shirt, Mrs. Holloway burst into the workroom, her face flushed with excitement. "You'll never guess who just rode into town," she announced, unwinding her shawl and stomping snow from her boots. "Daniel Blackwood himself." The name meant nothing to Rosalie. "Who?" Mrs. Holloway looked scandalized. "The Daniel Blackwood, owner of the largest cattle operation in eastern Kansas. Word is he's looking to expand his interests in Selena, maybe build a hotel or invest in the railroad spur." She bustled around the room, straightening already neat stacks of fabric. "They say he's worth over $100,000 and still unmarried at 35. Rosalie smiled at the older woman's enthusiasm. "I take it this is significant news for Selena's economy." "And it's eligible ladies," Mrs. Holloway added with a knowing look. He's staying at the Drover's Hotel for at least a week. Mayor's hosting a dinner for him tomorrow night, invited all the prominent business owners. She paused, eyes twinkling. Including your cowboy friend, Xavier. Why would he be invited? Seems Mr. Jensen mentioned him to Blackwood. Said Xavier has a way with horses like he's never seen. Blackwood's interested in improving his stock and might have a proposition for him. Mrs. Holloway began sorting through the day's mending. Oh, and the mayor's wife asked if we could alter a gown for her by tomorrow afternoon. Said she needs to look her best for the dinner. Rosalie set aside Xavier's completed shirt and turned her attention to the mayor's wife's gown, but her thoughts remained on Xavier. A proposition from a wealthy cattleman could mean an opportunity for him, perhaps the chance to realize his dream of starting a breeding operation. Yet something about the situation unsettled her. The following day brought a lull in the snowstorm and a flurry of activity as the town prepared for the mayor's dinner. Rosalie delivered the altered gown to the mayor's residence and was walking back to the shop when she spotted Xavier emerging from the barber shop, freshly shaved and looking uncharacteristically formal in a dark suit. "You clean up well," she called, smiling as he turned toward her voice. Xavier touched his smooth jaw self-consciously. "Feel naked without the beard, but Jensen insisted I look respectable for this dinner tonight. I heard about the invitation. Congratulations." He shrugged, falling into step beside her. "Not sure it's worth congratulating yet. Don't know what Blackwood wants. Mrs. Holloway seems to think he might have a business proposition for you. That's the rumor." Xavier's expression was guarded. "Jensen says he's looking for someone to manage his horse breeding program, wants to improve his stock with Arabian bloodlines." "That sounds like exactly what you've been wanting to do," Rosalie said, trying to ignore the pang in her chest at the thought of him leaving Selena. "It does," he agreed, though without the enthusiasm she'd expected. Blackwood's offering good money, a place to live on his ranch near Topeka, and a percentage of the profits from any successful breeding. They walked in silence for a moment, their breath fogging in the cold air. "When would you leave?" Rosalie finally asked. "If I take the job." "After the new year," Xavier stopped, turning to face her directly. "But I haven't decided yet." Something in his eyes made her heart quicken. "What's holding you back? It sounds like a perfect opportunity." "Maybe I've found reasons to stay in Selena," he said quietly. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Mayor Thompson, huffing his way up the street. "There you are, O'Malley. Been looking all over for you. Blackwood's asking to see that bay stallion you've been working with at Jensen's. Says he might want to purchase it for his breeding program." The mayor glanced at Rosalie, nodding politely. "Afternoon, Miss Kendrick." "I'll head over there now," Xavier said, clearly reluctant to end their conversation. He turned to Rosalie. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "Of course," she replied, though uncertainty clouded her thoughts. If he took this position with Blackwood, everything would change. The friendship they'd built and whatever might be growing between them would be severed by distance and circumstance. As she watched him walk away with the mayor, Rosalie was struck by how deeply Xavier had become woven into the fabric of her daily life. The thought of Selena without him left her feeling hollow. Back at the dress shop, she found herself unable to concentrate on her work. Mrs. Holloway, noticing her distraction, sent her upstairs to rest. "You're still recovering," she insisted when Rosalie protested. "No use pushing yourself and ending up back in Dr. Miller's care." Alone in her room, Rosalie pulled out Xavier's finished shirt and ran her fingers over the careful stitching. She had planned to give it to him for Christmas, still 2 weeks away. Now she wondered if he would even be in Selena by then. The thought forced her to confront feelings she'd been carefully avoiding. Somewhere between that first night in the doctor's office and now, Xavier O'Malley had become more than a benefactor, more than a friend. She had fallen in love with him, his quiet strength, his integrity, the gentle way he treated everyone around him. And now, just as she recognized these feelings, he might be leaving. A soft knock at her door roused her from these thoughts. Mrs. Holloway stood there, an envelope in her hand. "This just came for you," she said, curious but too polite to ask questions. The envelope bore only Rosalie's name in a bold, masculine script. Inside was a brief note. "Rosalie, if you're agreeable, I'd like to call on you tomorrow afternoon. There are matters I wish to discuss before making any decisions about Blackwood's offer. Yours, Xavier." Mrs. Holloway pretended not to notice Rosalie's flushed cheeks as she tucked the note away. "I was thinking of closing the shop early tomorrow," she said casually. "Weather's supposed to turn again, and no one wants to shop for dresses in a blizzard." "That would be fine," Rosalie managed, grateful for the older woman's tact. Sleep eluded Rosalie that night as she wondered what Xavier wanted to discuss. Was he seeking her advice about Blackwood's offer? Or was there something more personal he wished to address? By morning, she had worked herself into such a state of nervous anticipation that Mrs. Holloway took one look at her and assigned her the simplest tasks for the day. "No sense having you ruin good fabric when your mind's clearly elsewhere," she said kindly. The hours crawled by. Rosalie found herself checking the clock constantly, her stomach fluttering each time the shop door opened. Finally, at 2:30, Mrs. Holloway declared they were closing early due to the threatening weather. Dark clouds were indeed gathering on the horizon, promising another heavy snowfall by evening. "No sense in both of us catching our deaths," Mrs. Holloway said, donning her heavy cloak. "I'm going to visit my sister on Elm Street. You stay here where it's warm. I'll be back before dark." Alone in the shop, Rosalie moved restlessly from task to task, unable to settle. She had just decided to make a pot of tea when the front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and Xavier O'Malley. He looked different, somehow more confident, perhaps, or more determined. He'd clearly come straight from the livery, his clothes bore the scent of horses and leather, and his cheeks were ruddy from the cold. "Mrs. Holloway said I'd find you here," he said, removing his hat. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Rosalie replied, suddenly shy. "I was just about to make some tea. Would you like some?" Tea would be welcome. While Rosalie busied herself with the kettle in the small back room, Xavier remained in the shop, studying the various fabrics and partially completed garments with apparent interest. When she returned with 2 steaming cups, he accepted his with a grateful nod. "How was the dinner last night?" she asked, gesturing for him to take a seat near the stove. "Illuminating," he said after a moment. "Blackwood's an interesting man, driven, ambitious, used to getting his way. He made a formal offer for me to manage his horse breeding program." "That's wonderful," Rosalie said, though her heart contracted painfully. Xavier studied her face. "Is it? Would you be happy for me to leave Selena?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. I want what's best for you, of course." "That's not what I asked." His voice was gentle but insistent. "Rosalie, when I came to Selena 3 weeks ago, I had no plans to stay, just another town along the trail, a place to deliver cattle and move on. Then I walked into that doctor's office and saw you." He set down his cup and leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "I told myself I was just doing a good deed, that once you were recovered I'd be on my way, but something happened I didn't expect." He paused, searching for words. "For the first time in years, I started thinking about tomorrow and the day after that. Started seeing a future that wasn't just drifting from one cattle drive to another." Hope rose in Rosalie's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "What kind of future?" "One with roots, a home, purpose." His voice dropped lower. "One that includes you if you're willing." Rosalie's breath caught. "Xavier, I know it's sudden," he continued quickly. "We've only known each other a short time, but I've lived enough to recognize something rare when I find it. I care for you, Rosalie. More than I thought possible. What about Blackwood's offer?" I told him I needed time to consider it. Xavier reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "But the truth is, I don't want to leave Selena. I don't want to leave you." Rosalie looked down at their joined hands, her mind whirling. "What would you do if you stayed?" "Jensen's offered me a partnership in the livery. Says he's getting too old to run it alone and his sons have no interest in the business. It's not as grand as Blackwood's operation, but it's a solid opportunity. And there's land available just outside town enough for a small breeding program of my own someday. He squeezed her hand gently. But more important than any of that is how I feel when I'm with you. Like I've finally found the place I belong. The words Rosalie had been holding back rose to her lips. I don't want you to leave either. These past weeks getting to know you, spending time with you, they've meant more to me than I can express. Relief and joy transformed Xavier's face. Then I'll stay. I'll tell Blackwood tomorrow that I'm declining his offer. Are you sure? It's a significant opportunity, I'm sure. He stood, drawing her to her feet. Some opportunities are worth more than money. He was so close now that Rosalie could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, feel the warmth radiating from his body. When he leaned down, his intention clear, she rose to meet him, her heart pounding as their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in hushed white, but neither of them noticed. They were lost in the discovery of each other, in the promise of all that might be. The following morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Rosalie woke feeling as though she were floating, replaying the previous afternoon in her mind. After that first kiss, they had talked for hours, sharing hopes and dreams, making tentative plans. Xavier had walked her back to Mrs. Holloway's in the falling snow, and they'd lingered on the doorstep, reluctant to part. I'm having dinner with Blackwood tonight to give him my decision, he'd said, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. Will you meet me tomorrow? There's something I want to show you. She'd agreed, her heart too full for many words. Now, as she dressed for the day, she wondered what Xavier had planned. Mrs. Holloway was unusually quiet at breakfast, watching Rosalie with a speculative expression. Finally, as they were clearing the dishes, she spoke. That cowboy of yours is causing quite a stir in town. Rosalie's hands stilled on the plates. What do you mean? Word as he turned down Blackwood's offer, a very generous offer by all accounts. Jensen's practically crowing about their new partnership. Mrs. Holloway's eyes twinkled. People are wondering what could possibly keep a man from accepting such an opportunity. Or perhaps I should say, who could keep him? Heat rushed to Rosalie's face. It's not we're not, she stopped, unsure how to define what was happening between them. Mrs. Holloway patted her arm. No need to explain to me, dear. I've seen the way he looks at you. Just be careful with your heart. Men like that, rootless for so long, sometimes find it hard to stay in one place. The warning gave Rosalie pause. Was she being foolish, allowing herself to believe in a future with Xavier? He had spent years wandering, never forming attachments. What if the lure of the open range called him back? What if he grew restless in Selena? These doubts shadowed her throughout the morning as she worked in the shop. By the time Xavier appeared at the door just after noon, her earlier euphoria had been tempered by uncertainty. He sensed her mood immediately. Something's troubling you, he said as they walked along the snowy street. Rosalie hesitated, then decided honesty was essential. I've been thinking about your decision to stay. Are you certain it's what you want? I wouldn't want you to regret passing up Blackwood's offer. Xavier stopped, turning to face her. Is that really what's worrying you, or are you concerned I'll grow restless here and leave anyway? His perception startled her. Perhaps both, she admitted, his expression softened. I can't promise I'll never feel the pull of the open country again. It's been my life for too long. But I can promise that whatever future I build, I want to build it with you. He took her gloved hands in his. I've spent 12 years drifting, Rosalie. I'm ready to stop, to put down roots, not because I have to, but because I want to. The sincerity in his eyes melted her doubts. Where are we going? She asked, changing the subject. A smile crossed his face. You'll see. He led her to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open fields covered in pristine snow. A small barn stood about a quarter-mile from the last house, smoke rising from a chimney at its side. Jensen's old place, Xavier explained as they approached. He moved closer to town when his wife died last year, said the walk was getting too much for his old bones. He pushed open the barn door. It's been sitting empty since then. Inside, the barn was larger than it appeared from the outside, with stalls for 6 horses and a small living quarters attached. A fire burned cheerfully in the stone hearth, taking the chill from the air. "Jensen offered to sell it to me as part of our partnership," Xavier said, watching her face closely. 10 acres, the barn, and the living quarters. It needs work, but it's solid. Good water source, decent grazing land. Rosalie walked through the space, taking in the rough wooden table and chairs, the narrow bed in the corner, the shelves lined with a few basic supplies. It was Spartan but clean, with potential for comfort. "It's a good start," she said softly, "for your breeding operation. For more than that, I hope." Xavier moved to stand beside her. "I know it's small and not what you're probably used to." "It's perfect," Rosalie interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "It just needs a woman's touch." The hope that bloomed in Xavier's eyes took her breath away. "Does that mean?" "It means I'd like to help you make this a home," she said carefully, "in whatever capacity you're suggesting." Xavier took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting marriage, Rosalie, not today, perhaps not even this month. But soon, when we've had more time to know each other." He gestured around the simple space. "I can't offer much yet, just this place and my promise to work hard to make it better, to make a good life for us." Tears pricked Rosalie's eyes. "You don't even know me, not really." "There are things about my past. We all have pasts," he said gently. "Whatever yours holds, it doesn't change how I feel about you now." She moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered fields that stretched to the horizon. "My father was a banker in Philadelphia," she began, her back to him. "We lived comfortably, not wealthy, but secure. When I was 22, he arranged a marriage for me with the son of his business partner. Robert Hargrove was handsome, charming, from a good family. I thought myself fortunate." She paused, gathering courage. "A week before the wedding, I discovered he'd been unfaithful with my closest friend. When I confronted him, he struck me. Said once we were married, I would learn my place." Her voice hardened. "I broke the engagement. My friend denied everything. Robert told everyone I had fabricated the entire thing out of jealousy." "I'm sorry," Xavier said quietly. Rosalie continued as if she hadn't heard. "Philadelphia society is small and unforgiving. No one believed me, not even my parents. They insisted I go through with the marriage for the sake of the family's reputation and finances." She turned to face him. "I refused. My father disowned me. I left with nothing but a small inheritance from my grandmother. And came west," Xavier finished for her. She nodded. "I went to St. Louis first, then Kansas City, finally Selena. Each time moving farther from my past, trying to build something new." Xavier crossed to her, his expression grave. "Thank you for trusting me with your story. It can't have been easy." "No one in Selena knows," she admitted. "I've been so careful to keep to myself, to avoid forming attachments that could lead to more pain. Until I came along and disrupted everything," he said, a hint of a smile returning. "Until you saved my life and refused to let me push you away," she corrected. He reached for her hands again. "Your past doesn't change anything for me, Rosalie. If anything, knowing what you've overcome only makes me admire you more." Relief washed through her, relief and something deeper, a certainty that had been growing since that first night in the doctor's office. This man, with his quiet strength and unfailing kindness, was someone she could trust with her heart. "I'd like to accept your suggestion," she said softly. "About the future, about marriage," joy blazed in Xavier's eyes. "You're sure? We can wait longer if I'm sure," she interrupted. "Life's too short and too precious to waste time once you've found what you're looking for." He drew her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all that lay ahead. Outside, the winter sun cast long shadows across the snow, but inside the small barn, warmth and hope blossomed like spring. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. Xavier threw himself into preparations for his partnership with Jensen, learning the business side of the livery while continuing to work with the horses. Rosalie, meanwhile, was busier than ever at the dress shop as townswomen ordered new gowns for holiday gatherings. They saw each other whenever possible, shared meals, evening walks, Sunday afternoon rides to the barn that would soon be their home. Xavier worked on repairs and improvements in his spare time, and Rosalie began planning how to transform the sparse living quarters into a comfortable dwelling. News of their engagement spread quickly through Selena, met with general approval and only a few raised eyebrows at the speed of their courtship. Mrs. Holloway, after an initial period of cautious concern, became their staunchest supporter. "Life's too short to dither when you've found the right person," she declared, echoing Rosalie's own words. "My Harold proposed after knowing me just 2 weeks, and we had 43 good years together." The wedding was set for January 15th, a compromise between Xavier's desire to marry immediately and Rosalie's wish for time to prepare properly. Dr. Miller had agreed to give the bride away, and Jensen would stand as Xavier's best man. On Christmas Eve, a light snow was falling as Xavier escorted Rosalie back to Mrs. Holloway's after the church service. They lingered on the doorstep, reluctant as always to part. "I have something for you," Xavier said, reaching into his coat pocket. "I know we agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow, but this seemed like the right moment." He pressed a small package into her hand. Unwrapping it, Rosalie found a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Opening it, she discovered a tiny photograph of Xavier on one side, the other left empty. "For a picture of you," he explained, "so I can keep you close to my heart always." Tears sprang to her eyes. "It's beautiful, but how?" "This must have cost. Don't worry about the cost," he said gently. "I wanted you to have something special for our first Christmas together." Rosalie reached into her own pocket. "I have something for you too, though it's not nearly as fine." The package she handed him was larger, wrapped in brown paper and string. Inside was the woolen shirt she had made, dark blue with careful stitching and horn buttons. "I made it for you," she said, suddenly shy. "For the cold days working at the livery." Xavier ran his hands over the soft wool, visibly moved. "No one's made me clothing since my mother died. This means more to me than gold or silver ever could." He kissed her then, a tender exchange that held all the promise of their future together. As they parted, snowflakes catching on their eyelashes, Rosalie felt a completeness she had never known before. The new year brought a break in the winter weather, clear, cold days perfect for finalizing wedding preparations. Rosalie worked on her wedding dress in the evenings, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Holloway insisted on hosting a small reception at the dress shop after the ceremony. 3 days before the wedding, as Rosalie was putting the final touches on her dress, Mrs. Holloway burst into the workroom, her expression troubled. "Daniel Blackwood is back in town," she announced without preamble, "and he's asking for Xavier." Rosalie's hands stilled on the fabric. "Did he say why?" "Only that he has a new proposition." Mrs. Holloway hesitated. "He's brought his sister with him, this time a young widow from Boston. Very elegant, very wealthy." An uneasy feeling settled in Rosalie's stomach. "I'm sure it's just business." Mrs. Holloway looked unconvinced but didn't press the issue. Later that afternoon, Xavier arrived at the shop, his expression serious. "You've heard Blackwood's in town?" He asked once they were alone. Rosalie nodded. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned it. What does he want?" Xavier ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of internal conflict. "He's offering a partnership, not just employment. Wants me to oversee a new breeding operation, Arabian stock crossed with American Mustangs. Says he's been impressed with my reputation and what he saw during his last visit." "A partnership," Rosalie echoed, her uneasiness growing. "What would that entail?" "A significant investment on his part. A percentage of ownership for me, the chance to build something substantial." Xavier met her eyes directly. "It would mean moving to his ranch near Topeka, at least initially." The implications hung in the air between them. Moving to Topeka would mean abandoning their plans for the barn outside Salina, Xavier's partnership with Jensen, the life they had begun to build together. "What did you tell him?" Rosalie asked, proud of how steady her voice remained. "That I'm getting married in 3 days and would need to discuss it with my wife." He took her hands in his. "This is a decision we make together, Rosalie. Your happiness matters more to me than any business opportunity." Relief flooded through her. "When does he need an answer?" "Before he leaves town day after tomorrow." Xavier squeezed her hands. "We don't have to decide anything tonight. Let's think on it, pray on it, and talk again tomorrow." That night, Rosalie lay awake long after Mrs. Holloway's house had fallen silent. Xavier's integrity in bringing the matter to her immediately had reassured her of his commitment, but doubts still niggled. Blackwood's offer represented the kind of opportunity that came along rarely in a lifetime. Could she ask Xavier to turn it down for her sake? Would he resent her later if she did? By morning, she had reached a decision. After breakfast, she sent a note to Xavier asking him to meet her at their barn at noon. She arrived early, building a small fire to ward off the January chill, and waited. Xavier appeared precisely at noon, his face lighting at the sight of her. "I missed you," he said simply, gathering her into his arms for a brief embrace. When they separated, Rosalie steeled herself for what she needed to say. "I've been thinking about Blackwood's offer." "So have I," Xavier began, but she held up a hand. "Please let me speak first." She took a deep breath. "This is an incredible opportunity for you, the kind most men would sacrifice anything to obtain. I won't be the reason you turn it down." Xavier's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you should accept Blackwood's offer." The words were difficult, but Rosalie forced them out. "We can delay the wedding, see if there's a place for me in Topeka. Or what?" Xavier's voice had grown dangerously quiet. "Or we can release each other from our promises," she finished, unable to meet his eyes. "I don't want to hold you back from the future you deserve." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Finally, Xavier spoke. "Look at me, Rosalie." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "Is this what you want, to end our engagement?" "No," she whispered, honesty winning out over noble intentions. "But I don't want you to sacrifice your dreams for me either." Xavier's expression softened. "Have you considered that you might be part of those dreams? That any future without you would feel empty, no matter how prosperous or prestigious?" Hope flickered in Rosalie's chest. "But Blackwood's offer is just an offer." Xavier moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Last night I wrote him a letter declining his proposition. I posted it this morning before I received your note." Shock rendered Rosalie momentarily speechless. "You declined, without discussing it with me?" "I told him I had discussed it with you, which was true. What I didn't mention was that our discussion wasn't quite complete." A smile played around his lips. "Some decisions don't require long deliberation, Rosalie. I knew in my heart what I wanted." "And what's that?" she asked, hardly daring to believe. "This life we're building together. This town. This barn." His voice dropped lower. "This woman who's become the center of my world." Joy swept through Rosalie, washing away the doubts and fears of the previous night. "Are you certain?" "More certain than I've ever been of anything." He cupped her face gently. "I spent years chasing horizons, Rosalie. I'm done running. Whatever future awaits us, whatever challenges or opportunities, we'll face them together, right here where we've chosen to put down roots." 3 days later, on a crisp January morning with the sun shining on fresh fallen snow, Rosalie Kendrick became Rosalie O'Malley in a simple ceremony at Selina's small church. She wore her ivory satin dress, her hair adorned with a crown of winter greenery. Xavier, in a new suit purchased for the occasion, could scarcely take his eyes off her as they spoke their vows before the assembled townspeople. The reception at Mrs. Holloway's dress shop was a joyous affair, with food provided by the ladies of the church and music from a local fiddler. Dr. Miller raised a toast to the couple whose story had begun in his surgery, and Jensen presented them with a matched pair of riding horses as a wedding gift. As evening fell, Xavier and Rosalie slipped away to their barn, now transformed into a cozy home with curtains at the windows, quilts on the bed, and a sense of permanence that neither had known for many years. Standing in the doorway of their new home, Xavier swept his bride into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley." "Home," Rosalie repeated, savoring the word. "I never thought I'd find one again." "Nor I," Xavier admitted, carrying her over the threshold. "But then, I never expected to walk into a doctor's office and find my future waiting there." As he set her gently on her feet, Rosalie reached up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "I'm glad you paid that bill," she whispered, "and stayed until morning." "Best money I ever spent," Xavier replied, drawing her close, "and I intend to keep that vigil for all the mornings to come." Outside, stars appeared one by one in the Kansas sky, bearing witness to the beginning of their life together, a life built on an act of kindness, grown through shared adversity, and now blossoming into love that would endure through all the seasons to come. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it new beginnings. Xavier's partnership with Jensen flourished, his reputation as a horseman drawing customers from across the state. Rosalie continued working at Mrs. Holloway's shop while establishing a small side business making men's clothing shirts, vests, and jackets that quickly became sought after for their quality and durability. Their little home expanded as Xavier added a proper kitchen and a second room. They planted a vegetable garden and apple trees, acquired chickens and a milk cow, and began to feel truly settled on their 10 acres at the edge of Selena. In late April, as wildflowers carpeted the Kansas prairie, Rosalie shared news that filled Xavier with wonder and trepidation. They would welcome a child before the year's end. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months, and by autumn, as the harvest was gathered, they prepared their home for the new arrival. On a cold December night, almost exactly a year after Xavier had paid Dr. Miller to save Rosalie's life, their son was born, a healthy, robust boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him Thomas Edward O'Malley, honoring Xavier's brothers while giving their child his own identity. Life settled into a rhythm of hard work and simple joys. Xavier's breeding operation began modestly with 2 Arabian mares and grew steadily over the years. Rosalie's clothing business expanded as well, eventually requiring its own small shop adjacent to their home. 2 years after Thomas's birth, a daughter joined the family, Rebecca Rose, with her mother's gentle spirit and her father's determination. The O'Malleys became fixtures in Selena, contributing to the town's growth and prosperity as it evolved from a frontier settlement into a thriving community. There were challenges, of course: drought years when the crops failed, winters when illness swept through the town, economic downturns that tested their resilience. Through it all, Xavier and Rosalie faced each difficulty together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their now substantial home watching Thomas and Rebecca play with their youngest brother, Samuel, Xavier took Rosalie's hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying in Selena, choosing this life?" Rosalie looked at their children, at the prosperous farm and business they had built, at the man beside her who had kept his promise to remain through all the mornings of their life together. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "Every choice that led us here was the right one." Xavier squeezed her hand, his heart full. "When I walked into that doctor's office all those years ago, I never imagined I was walking toward everything I would ever need." "Sometimes," Rosalie replied, leaning her head against his shoulder, "the most important journeys begin with a single act of kindness." As twilight settled over their land, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Xavier and Rosalie O'Malley remained on their porch, surrounded by the life they had created together, a life that had begun when a cowboy with a kind heart paid a doctor's bill and stayed until morning.